My name is Lucy Wagstaff. I work at Planet Mark and I am a senior sustainability communications manager. So I really help our members avoid greenwashing and sort of tell their sustainability journey with authenticity and credibility. So I'm going to hand over to John now to introduce himself as our other co-host for today.
Thanks, Lucy. Good afternoon, everybody. Great to see such an eclectic mix of backgrounds and organizations in the chat there, and obviously recognize a few names and organizations. So great to have you guys on board. John Tarbett, I am, for want of a more succinct title, Head of Strategic Accounts and Carbon Management here at Planet Mark. Essentially, I support our wonderful team of account managers who work with our major strategic accounts, ensure that everything is on track and aligned with all the work we do with them. And I also head up our carbon management services. And within that division, we support clients with ESOS, with on-site energy audits, introducing technology partners to members on their decarbonisation journey. As a bit of context, my background in the last 24 years has been a combination of finance, technology, and the last 14 odd years in the consulting space and within energy efficiency in the built environment. As a consequence, I've always taken a really pragmatic commercial approach to sustainability. And so I love working with all our members as you progress on this net zero transition journey, but also fully acknowledging that you all have a day job of running and in most cases growing a business. So very mindful of that in all our sort of engagement with organizations.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, John. And then just before we sort of begin the presentation in full, please use the Q&A function for any questions. We're going to go through our presentation and then we'll have a Q&A section at the very end where we will try and answer your questions as best we can. And yeah, just so you know that this is being recorded. So we will send a recording after this session. And yeah, please do engage with us on social media. So on the agenda for today, first of all, what is Planet Mark? We recognise there are some people here who know Planet Mark very well. Others may have never heard of Planet Mark, or others, know of Planet Mark and not sure what we do. So just going to go into a little bit of an overview of that. Net zero. What do we mean exactly by achieving net zero? And then looking at authentic sustainability communications to help sort of help you communicate that journey towards net zero. And then looking at how authentic communications and really transparent comms can actually help you to win business. And then looking at those sort of more holistic benefits of actually embedding sustainability into your organization. So first of all, what is Planet Mark? So Planet Mark is a leading carbon reduction and net zero specialist. We are committed to helping businesses of all sizes find unified solutions to reduce carbon emissions, secure net zero targets, generate long-term business value, and deliver meaningful climate action. Our sustainability data analysts, engagement experts, and communication specialists work together as one unified team to their emissions, engage their organizations, engage the people within their organization, and communicate their achievements with confidence. And our shared goal is very much to help businesses reduce carbon emissions and meet those net zero targets. So this webinar is all about sustainability, and we want to just get into the definitions of net zero, really. Every organisation will be at a different stage on their journey. So I thought it would be helpful to just sort of really define what we mean by net zero. So some of you may have seen this image before. These are Professor Hawkins' climate stripes of the globe from 1850 to 2020. And unfortunately, these stripes illustrate that the 10 hottest years on records have all occurred in the last decade. To avoid the most serious impacts of global warming, we need to stay within 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming compared to pre-industrial levels. To stay within this 1.5 degree target, we need to bring global greenhouse gas emissions down to net zero by 2050 at the latest. So that's quite quite a shocking image, but let's talk about how we're going to get there, how we're actually going to get to net zero. So what is net zero? Net zero means cutting greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible, with any remaining emissions reabsorbed from the atmosphere. In accordance with the Science Based Targets Initiative Corporate Net Zero Standard, or we'll refer to it as the SBTI, an organisation can be considered net zero once it has reduced emissions across all 3 scopes by at least 90% of the baseline. And the standard outlines that corporate targets should be in line with the ambition to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, and that organisations should set near-term targets to deliver deep emissions cuts in the next 5 to 10 years, and only the unavoidable residual emissions, totaling no more than 10%, may be neutralised at the net zero target year using accredited carbon removal offsets. And achieving net zero by 2050 is very much part of UK legislation following a government amendment to the 2008 Climate Change Act.
And I think just to add in there, Lucy, if I may, one key thing to note is that this path to net zero and any transition plan is non-linear. Whilst on theory, on paper, you're going to see this beautiful curve once you've measured your initial scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. That plan in reality is going to have lumps, bumps, plateaus, potentially some spikes in the wrong direction. We fully understand that, and your transition plan has to be treated as a live document. It's something that will change, it will evolve as your business changes, as technology changes, opportunities and potentially new solutions to decarbonize also come to the fore. So we're always mindful of that when working with our clients. And equally, we acknowledge that some of our members are at very different stages of that journey. Some are in the process of already having set ambitious targets. They've measured their full footprint and perhaps they're underway already with significant decarbonisation across the business, whilst others are literally just starting that journey of measuring their emissions. And, you know, greenhouse gas emissions, all the SBTI, all these acronyms are new to them, and part of our role is to help navigate through that. Everyone's at a different stage. There's no right or wrong, but I think underlying and, you know, with the overarching message today, it's important to be honest with your stakeholders, with your customers, as to where you are on that journey, and especially as it unfolds.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. So what do we mean then when we talk about reducing scopes 1, 2, and 3 by 90%? What exactly are these scopes? So you cannot manage what you do not measure, essentially. And the Greenhouse Gas Protocol establishes a comprehensive global standardized framework to measure and manage greenhouse gas emissions from private and public sector operations, value chains, and mitigation actions. And so the Greenhouse Gas Protocol corporate standard divides a company's emissions into direct and indirect emissions. So you have your scope 1 emissions, which are your company facilities, gas, fuel, or refrigerants, your company vehicles. You have your scope 2 emissions, which is your electricity, district heating, and steam. And then you have your scope 3 emissions, and it's recognised that scope 3 can definitely be the biggest contributor to an organisation's emissions. And they encompass a broad spectrum of indirect greenhouse gas emissions, and they are classified into 15 categories. These categories span the entirety of a company's value chain, from upstream emissions related to purchased or acquired goods and services to downstream emissions, which is related to sold goods and services. They include emissions associated with purchased goods and services, capital goods, fuel and energy-related activities that aren't covered in scopes 1 and 2, and additionally, transportation and distribution emissions, both upstream and downstream, are accounted for, which encompasses the movement of material, products and people that are integral to the company's operations. Scope 3 categories also extend to employee related activities, which includes business travel and commuting, recognising the emissions that are generated during work-related transportation. The impact of leased assets, both upstream and downstream, is considered alongside emissions arising from the processing, use and end-of-life treatment of sold products. Franchise operations and investments are also included in the Scope 3 categories, reflecting emissions associated with broader business activities and financial decisions. So by delineating these categories, companies can gain really valuable insights into the diverse sources of their emissions, which enables them to develop targeted strategies to mitigate their environmental impact and promote sustainability across the entire value chain. So you will have heard that there is the term carbon neutral and net zero, and we just wanted to here to sort of just clarify the difference there, as achieving carbon neutrality is a really great step on a sustainability journey, but it is not the end goal. The end goal is net zero, which, as we know, means cutting greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible. As you can see here, carbon neutrality does not include measurement of Scope 3, and it does not include a carbon reduction target for Scope 3. And to achieve carbon neutrality, your organisation would buy offsets equivalent to the total carbon footprint, whereas to achieve net zero, it would be about reducing Scopes 1, 2 and 3 by 90% and then only offsetting that remaining 10%. And when we talk about achieving carbon neutrality, we talk about it in line with achieving PAS 2060, which is the recognised framework for achieving carbon neutrality.
And I think and I'm sure some people on the call will have experienced this as well. We do still see and hear quite a lot of confusion about the difference between carbon neutrality and net zero terminology, and do see it used incorrectly. And for us, supporting our members with our sort of communications team, that can be critical, because a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing, and also don't let a lot of great work around sustainability be undone by accidentally using the wrong phrase, which is then sniped down by somebody in the sidelines. Because there are, as we know, there are plenty of people out there who are seeking to potentially discredit where wrong terminology is used, even if the intention was certainly in the right place. So it's just, from our side, being very clear that communicating on sustainability, just be very careful with the terminology that you use. Don't undo great work by having a small slip up. And again, where we support our members on communication, I think is a critical part of that.
Thanks, John. Absolutely. We just wanted to highlight here as well some international campaigns and standards. So we touched on earlier that the SBTi corporate net zero standard is the world's only framework for corporate net zero target setting in line with climate science, and it's globally recognised, and it aims to provide a clear and consistent methodology to scientifically align targets to a 1.5 degree pathway, which is really important. And we've also got the UN-backed Race to Zero campaign, which is a global campaign rallying non-state sectors to take rigorous and immediate action to halve global emissions by 2030. We really recommend that organisations have their net zero near-term and long-term targets validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative, and also commits to achieving net zero via the Race to Zero, and have that sort of that commitment really public. We recommend that. So just looking at sort of why net zero, we've touched on the moral imperative. Climate change is very much one of the greatest threats that we face. And there is the legal imperative sort of linked to that it is now enshrined in UK law that UK businesses must reduce their total greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by the end of 2050. But as we will sort of talk about a little bit later on in this webinar, there are definite commercial risks and opportunities linked to sustainability. So we'll go into that in a little more detail. But first of all, we're going to look at what are authentic sustainability communications. And a lot of you will have heard the term greenwashing, which companies will do generally by mistake. It can come about through essentially just lack of clear communications. But what greenwashing is exaggerated or unsubstantiated claims about the environmental sustainability commitments of a company. And there's an increase in customers and staff and investors looking for proof before giving any credibility. And it's really important that you avoid greenwashing from the outset by making sure that you're giving enough context in your communications.
Lucy's just going to add as well, I think at the other end of the scale, something we're starting to see is green hushing as well, where actually organizations become fearful of putting out certain communications or articulating certain activities they've done for fear of, exactly as I've mentioned before, being shot down because perhaps it's not quite as accurate as it could be. So there is that thing. Obviously, greenwashing is so important to not do that. But equally, we want to ensure that our members can communicate what they are doing and not be quiet about it, because it is important, not just for the greater good and to get that critical mass, so people hear more and more people in their supply chains are doing things. But if you are investing and making those business decisions to do the right thing, you want to be communicating them properly and well.
Absolutely, completely. And just to link to that unfortunately there are some consequences of greenwashing, which involve damage brand reputation, can undermine the authenticity and credibility of a company's environmental claims. It's like John was saying earlier, it may be that you've done the right thing, but it's been communicated in the wrong way. And so it might actually damage your brand reputation when you've actually put in those places to make your company more sustainable. But it's the way in which you've portrayed that information that might actually mislead or exaggerate what you've done. There are regulatory fines out there. Regulatory bodies closely monitor environmental claims made by companies to ensure that they are accurate and not misleading. And yeah, it can hinder progress towards decarbonisation. It can often cause confusion and cynicism amongst the public, which, as we said, might undermine genuine efforts of business leaders around the world who are taking legitimate climate action.
And I think that cynicism can creep into your own internal stakeholders and your staff as well. So if they see that an organization is perhaps blatantly greenwashed, that can undermine things, because you need your whole team's buy-in for this sustainability journey. That needs to be from the SLT all the way down to the newest, most junior member of staff. So I think that's really important as well. Blatant greenwashing can have a negative effect internally as well. And we have seen that with some conversations with people looking to move organization. Why are they perhaps, what's caused that? And they said, we just don't believe in the messages that are going out. We know it's not quite accurate. So that in itself is truly important.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, John. And then just to add to that, yeah, there is legislation out there and regulations. The EU is banning, to protect consumers in the EU. The EU has introduced a ban on all misleading environmental claims. So terms such as climate neutral or climate positive that rely on offsetting will be banned from the EU by 2026 as part of a crackdown on misleading environmental claims. Meanwhile, in the UK, a lot of you, I imagine, will have heard of the Advertising Standards Authority, or the ASA. And the ASA is issuing a number of rulings in recent months, claims all upheld on the basis that ads were omitting material information and were misleading customers. So the ASA has made it clear that it does not view environmental claims issues as completely binary, and it's not really fair to say that businesses must choose between greenwashing and green hushing, but it's just good to be aware of the things that they are looking out for, so that you can sort of use this as a checklist and as a guide, so that when you're putting any communications out there about your environmental credentials, you're sort of going through that checklist and making sure that you've covered everything off. So just looking at what that kind of checklist is according to the ASA guidance. So what we would say here is, what's the most likely interpretation of that claim? to the average consumer or the average stakeholder reading that claim, what is their most likely sort of understanding of it? Because you want to make it clear what the claim is based on and what that claim actually is. And claims that go unqualified could lead to consumers getting the wrong impression about your products and services, and unqualified claims could mislead if they actually omit significant information. So the ASA recommends that communications must be presented in a clear and unambiguous way, and to make sure that communications aren't untimely as well. And that qualifications may be necessary to explain the meaning of certain claims, and that's okay, but they should only be used to clarify or provide additional information, and not actually contradict any sort of claims that were originally made. And where general claims could be interpreted as absolute claims or have multiple interpretations, additional information is required to make the meaning of that claim really clear. So just want to give you just a little example of sort of thinking about those guidelines and sort of bringing those to life in a sense, with a sort of the visual imagery that will hopefully sort of explain this a little bit. So the ASA received a complaint about a Pepsi Lipton poster for these drinks, and the complainant actually challenged whether the claim 100% recycled misleadingly implied that all of the Lipton bottle was made from 100% recycled plastic, because then if you look at the bottom of the poster here, there is an asterisk where it says bottle made from recycled plastic excludes cap and label. And so here, it was considered that even if some consumers had seen that qualification at the bottom, the overall impression created by the headline and the graphics is that all of the parts of the bottle are 100% recycled. And so the qualification actually at the bottom actually contradicted the headline. And obviously this is an advert, and so this is, you know, when we talk about sustainability communications, we mean such a broad spectrum of communications. But we just wanted to use this example where an ASA upheld the complaint just to show you sort of about qualifying claims, but also making sure to not contradict those claims and making sure that those claims are really unambiguous from the off. Okay, so how do we avoid greenwashing? So as I said at the start, my role at Planet Mark is very much to help organisations talk about their carbon emissions journeys and their carbon emissions reduction journeys whilst they're on the path to net zero. So my advice will be very much like focused on sort of how to talk about your decarbonisation journey with authenticity and transparency. So context is key. The more context you can provide, the better. And ensuring that any claims about your carbon reduction journey and what you've measured are really unambiguous. So we're talking about the reporting boundary, the emission sources that you've taken into account, the scope of emissions, thinking back to those kind of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, which of those have you measured, and those categories within scope 3. The year that you have taken into account, your reporting year, and then the results of those, making sure that they are really clear and that you've provided all the context needed to make those claims sort of really understood. We also say that one of the best ways to avoid greenwashing is to align with internationally recognised standards and frameworks. So we have measured our emissions in line with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. You follow the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standard. We have set net zero targets following the principles of the SBTi corporate net zero standard. We have achieved carbon neutrality for our operations in line with PAS 2060. This shows that you have followed a standard, a set of guidelines, regulations, that you have had your homework marked, essentially, that you are following the rules needed to make sure that those claims are really substantiated. And then progress over perfection. As John mentioned earlier, that a sustainability journey is very much non-linear. And John, I don't know if you want to speak to that one a bit more.
Agree. I think that's one of the biggest things. It is progress over perfection. No one is expecting anyone to solve their net zero journey overnight. And it's about being honest about where things are working, where progress is heading in the right direction. But equally, I personally think, perhaps where things aren't working. Some organizations I've seen that have said we've tried certain things, they haven't worked, and so we're trying something else. That to me, you have a more authentic engagement with that, with that organization. You know that they're actively trying things, but equally they're not afraid to fail, but will then quickly pivot, try additional solutions or different solutions. So I think that's equally as important to perhaps communicate that you've tried certain things. Not everything has worked, but you're actively at all times progressing.
Absolutely. It's all about updating sort of your audiences on your journey. And it's all about putting things out there in the public domain, increasing that transparency, and being confident to publish sort of where you're at and where you want to go. So publishing ambitious but realistic net zero long-term targets in line with climate science, really thinking about when your organization can look to achieve those net zero targets. Signing up to the Race to Zero or having your targets validated by the SBTi, as I mentioned earlier, putting those sort of claims out there in the public domain. Publishing your net zero baseline. Your net zero baseline will be your scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions, also or your total carbon footprint, showing where you're starting off. What's your sort of your beginning position, and and then providing a roadmap to show how you're going to get there, how you're going to take sort of strategic decisions to reduce those emissions. And as we said, publishing updates along the way. And it's okay to admit that things haven't worked.
I'm sorry, if I could just jump in there, Lucy, as well, just to add what we're seeing as well on certainly around, perhaps that baseline and roadmap element is also being brought into some legislation elements such as ESOS, which some of you on this call, I'm sure, are aware of, the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, which is for larger organizations. And I won't go into the detail on it, but essentially it's measuring your entire footprint every 4 years across your businesses if you are over a certain size, either by employee metrics or certain financial metrics. But whilst we're just completing phase 3, the first 2 phases, candidly, were very much a tick box exercise, organizations just stating what their emissions were and the identified opportunities to reduce down, and improve on their energy efficiency. For phase 3 this time, after a big consultation, the government, and this is run essentially by the Environment Agency, organizations by December of this year now also have to put in place an ESOS action plan. If you think of that as a mini net zero transition plan between now and December 27, which is phase 4, but within that action plan, they have to state which measures they're going to implement and when, and expected energy savings from that. And whilst there is no legal obligation for them to put in anything, or indeed to make sure that they do implement what they say they're going to implement, now there is an annual progress report that has to be submitted by December 25 and a subsequent one in December 26. So ESOS is bringing a degree of accountability to the table, which I think is a great thing. It has been missing. And it just goes back to that roadmap. Those progress reports for some organizations will say things have stalled, we've moved offices, we've had to change, there's been a downturn in the economy, we haven't been able to implement things. Fine. In other cases, maybe that more measures have been brought forward because they were able to do so. But just the mere fact that that data is going to be available in the public domain as well, high level figures, but that degree of accountability and a roadmap, I think, is becoming more and more important.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Great. Okay, so now we are moving on to sort of the section of the webinar, where we're talking about communicating your sustainability journey transparently to win business, and what does that actually look like? Okay, so there has been a significant shift in the evaluation of an organization's sustainability credentials, and winning tenders and contracts can be stalled if a company doesn't have sustainability credentials that they can talk about with transparency. So, as you know, greenhouse gas emissions are needed for contracts, tenders, and supplier questionnaires now. A lot of contracts require more detailed proof than ever on carbon measurement, what's been measured, and what those targets look like. We've also got businesses must commit to net zero by 2050 and publish clear and credible carbon reduction plans before they can bid for major government contracts. And so there is increasing scrutiny with public sector requirements in contracts and tenders. And yes, if you sit in the value chain of the public sector, then yeah, there will be sort of scrutiny there of where you are at on your sustainability journey. And we are seeing sort of when we've sort of supported members with tenders, we are seeing the sort of growing demand for proof and evidence of measured greenhouse gas emissions, and growing demand for proof of verification of those, third-party verification, who's marked your homework, essentially. That's what we're seeing, sort of, members being asked for. So just to look at that in a bit more detail, we have seen, a sort of an increase in questions about greenhouse gas emissions. This is for client tenders, bids, supplier questionnaires, and other sort of similar documents. And these are the questions that tend to be asked. So there is also an opportunity here to be really transparent. And if a tender has come to you and you haven't measured your emissions, then it shows you how your business will need to adapt to kind of win that kind of business, what is going to be required of your business, how your business is going to maybe have to look through a slightly different sustainability lens to make sure that you win those contracts and tenders. So just questions of, do you measure your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions? Have you published these in the public domain? We see lots of questions about targets. So has your company had your targets validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative? Are you going to set one? So it's not that there is an opportunity to say that you haven't done certain things, but you are going to do them and that you are committed. Also, we've seen lots of questions around sort of strategy, asking organizations what is their decarbonisation plan, and can they provide details of any kind of roadmaps that they're following to really show how they're looking at the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions in detail, and how they're going to make those deep cuts in emissions. So yeah, this could be an opportunity to talk about where you're looking at significant operational improvements to reduce emissions, where you're looking to move to electric vehicles, where you're looking to sort of broaden your scope of measurement. For example, it might be that you've just got scope 1 and 2 under your belt, and you're looking to sort of expand that to include your scope 3 emissions as well. And then with transparency, is there anything that is in the public domain to show that you are publicly reporting on your emissions?
I think just picking up on that last point, Lucy, as well, if you do have things in the public domain, it sounds obvious, but we do see this quite a lot. It's making sure that what you're stating, perhaps in a tender return or in a bid, is aligned to what you already have put out there. You don't want conflicting roadmaps, you don't want conflicting data or conflicting messages. It needs to look aligned for it obviously to be authentic. And also the questions that Lucy's just talked through there that you see in the slide, from what we're seeing, these aren't just now for major bids, major contracts. These are also trickling down into, trickling right down the supply chain. So a lot of SMEs have been asked some, if not all, of these questions just in, day-to-day engagement with some of their larger clients. So I think it's important that regardless of the size of your organization, that, as Lucy says, you're not necessarily going to have the answers to all of them now, but to start putting in place a plan to have the answers, or at least to be able to articulate that you have a way forward, you are considering them, and that the wheels are in motion to address them all.
Absolutely. And just to sort of add to our point here about tender and contract requirements, just that we wanted to give an example of when a major household software company has asked for these specific sort of specific evidence of verification and third-party assurance. So they've asked for the scopes of emissions measured, the period of time associated with that measurement, the criteria, so the kind of the subject was measured, so the standard aligned with, and then a plethora of evidence to actually show that proof and show that third-party assurance. So we just wanted to show that there as an example of requests we're seeing day to day. Okay, so we've also got the element of, so sort of moving away from sort of tenders and contracts now, we've also got the element of embedding sustainability and sort of having really robust and credible sustainability credentials is becoming more and more important for attracting investors and responding to customer demand. So by having your carbon footprint measured and a real roadmap to get to net zero, you can attract mission-aligned investors who are behind the purpose of the business. And this will then obviously enable scale for growth. And investors may view significant indirect upstream or downstream emissions of a company's operations as potential liabilities as well. And we've got a little stat there, just that Gartner research finds that 85% of investors considered ESG factors in their investments in 2020. Obviously, we're very much talking about the environmental aspect here of ESG, but I think there is just a growing sort of demand for that. And we are seeing this with customers as well. One emerging trend is that customers' interest in real-time carbon footprint data is showing that in some recent Deloitte's research that 1 in 6 consumers believe that measurable carbon footprint data is a core part of what makes a product or service sustainable, and 11% will make a purchase decision based on that carbon footprint data availability. So more transparency around the carbon footprint of products and services is one way to address consumers' need for more information.
I think as well, the first point in that slide as well, Lucy, is we're seeing that from the conversations we have with various funds and with some private equity firms. Certainly from their perspective, when looking to invest, whilst they don't necessarily always need a full net zero pathway and an organisation to have got to that stage, they at the minimum expect that they are certainly fully measuring their footprint and that they're starting that journey. We're seeing that more and more, and it's interesting even around ESOS, where perhaps in theory the private equity firm could be the responsible undertaking to do a single report. They're disaggregating, they're forcing all the firms within their portfolio to do their own individual reporting, because for many it's the first time they've had to go into that level of detail, but they're wanting to know exactly what their portfolio is doing from a carbon perspective and the individual pathways so that they can communicate that on. So yeah, more and more we're seeing that is really important, that you've at least started that journey from a measurement perspective where investment's concerned.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. And we just wanted to touch on as well, just looking a little bit more holistically at the benefits of embedding sustainability into your organization and what that can bring to your organization. So I'm not going to read through all these points here, but sustainability can very much be a strategic business advantage. It can set your business apart. As we said, appealing to that customer demand. It enables proactive responses to industry changes, so developing a culture of long-term sustainability and sector leadership by embracing uncertainty and setting standards. It can facilitate cost savings. if you're looking at sort of changing your operations, that might help have cost savings further down the line. Brand reputation. It enables you to attract loyal customers and like-minded employees. We've got it's a huge thing that customers are looking for now. They're wanting to see that proof, that evidence, and they're becoming more savvy to it as well. And it shows also. Oh yeah, sorry, John, you go for it.
Sorry, Lucy. I was just going to say, and I think point 4 as well about facilitating cost savings. I mean, largely because that's what I've been heavily involved with clients, for the last sort of decade and a half. But sustainability should be viewed as good for competitive business as well. Reducing operating costs, you're improving your margins or the ability to be more competitive in, ever increasingly competitive markets. But also it's helping attract the right talent, as we talked about before. If you have genuine sustainability flowing through the business that's communicated well throughout the team, it does help attract the right talent. And we're seeing this more and more, especially with the younger generations coming up through the ranks. Certainly when I was, far too long ago at school, or then starting the sort of career side of things, sustainability wasn't really a thing that you considered within businesses. You didn't have a sustainability director. You didn't have someone sitting on the board who wore that level of responsibility. But now that's a big thing, and we see that, and commentary with a lot of our members, they're saying it's important because we need to attract talent. Either they've perhaps been losing people or not been able to get them, or by doing it well, they're seeing it gives them a real edge. And it's a really important thing to consider.
Completely. And just to add to that point about sort of seeing those sort of potential cost savings, there are opportunities here for improved efficiency as well, by looking at your business through a sustainability lens, looking at where you could reduce those emissions, but actually that could then help improve the efficiency of operations as well, which then might also bring about cost savings in reducing the sort of the wasted operations, for example. So there's very much like a sort of holistic cyclical nature to sort of bringing sustainability really at the forefront of your business. And we just wanted to pop this quote here because McKinsey & Company did some really good research looking at sort of the impact when companies embed sort of ESG into their growth strategies. And they found that the message is very much clear. Not only can you do well while doing good, you can very much do better. And just to sort of touch on that bit a little bit more about sort of becoming purpose-led and really embedding sort of environmental practices into the fabric of your business. A Demos report found that a nationwide shift to purpose-led business, companies that put people and planet at the heart of their operations, will secure sort of really fantastic results. I'm not going to read through the stats here, but you can see that analysis found that purpose-led is very much the way to go. And it also helps if you have highly engaged teams. This can translate to improved productivity. Highly engaged teams show a 21 greater profitability, according to recent research. Helps create a sense of belonging, that sort of ownership of an employee feeling that their actions contribute to the company's purpose every day, that they can make changes, that they have agency to actually improve the sustainability in the business, that they have a voice to make sure that if the company is really committed to environmental credentials, that they're being heard because they're the one doing the jobs every day, and they can see where the emissions are high, and they can see where efficiencies could be brought in. And I think it's really key that every individual understands where the company is on its sustainability journey, where these carbon hotspots lie, and the organization's commitments to reduce the carbon emissions. It's all about inspiring the individual to take that action so that they have agency to see how they can do things differently. and it's about bringing your staff on board. Of course, this involves engagement and upskilling and ensuring that they understand what a carbon hotspot is, how their role actually can be changed to make the carbon emissions of the company reduce as a whole. So yeah, it's about making sure that these changes are really visible to staff as well, so that they can see as a company that you are taking those suggestions and implementing those actions to reduce the carbon emissions of the company. But again, this is where really transparent communications is key. It might be that your company has a long way to go on its journey, but it's about bringing the staff on board so they understand sort of where your company is at, where the company wants to get to, and the roadmap so that they can see how to get there. And again, admitting to staff when things haven't worked, when emissions have gone up in a certain area, maybe it's due to changes in the business, so that they understand sort of the company as it evolves on this journey. So I think we are now sort of at the key takeaways section of our talk today. So we really want to highlight that this is progress over perfection. Tell the story of your sustainability journey based on where you are now, accepting it will be non-linear, and being transparent about where you are now and where you want to get to. Communicate your sustainability commitments to your staff so that they become invested in the business's purpose, and very much take on the mantra of you can't manage what you don't measure, and that you may be required to provide evidence to show where you're at on that measurement journey. We very much say that a sustainability journey for a corporation is a measurement journey, and this will grow over time as well. And it's not just about about publishing data, it's about making those changes really visible as well. John, I don't know if you want to add anything here at this point.
No, I think that's great. I think those are the key things. And I think, about communicating the commitments as well, but communicating progress, as we said, tell the good and the bad. I think, say where things are working, but also highlight where perhaps mistakes have been made. I personally think that adds a lot to the authenticity of a journey. I appreciate that's not applicable or appropriate in every case, but I think in many cases it can be very powerful. But equally, the evidence-based, being asked to demonstrate that someone else has marked and verified your homework, your footprint, that is critical. But yeah, I hope some of the things that we've gone through today resonate and are helpful. And if there's any questions now, we'll certainly have a look at those and be delighted to answer them.
Yeah, please do. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat box. Sorry, no, in the Q&A box, not the chat box, the Q&A box. I've just seen, a really good question come in there. We use an external provider for our social media communications. How can we make sure that they don't create content that greenwashes? Really good point. Yeah, a lot of organizations will have marketing agencies or PR agencies, and we have a range of resources on the Planet Mark website. We have an anti-greenwashing guide, which you can kind of use as a checklist. We'll also send the slides after this webinar, which you're very welcome to use. And I would say as well, using the ASA guidance, even though that's very much for adverts, it's a fantastic checklist to use to check that your content isn't misleading or needs further qualification or is contradictory. So in the next slide, actually, we have the ASA guidance hyperlinked. So I'd recommend sending that to your agency or whoever sort of produces that content, and ensure that they're looking at that checklist. But I'd say a second pair of eyes is always really important here, making sure that sort of second person who's reviewing it understands what that claim is from the off, and it's not ambiguous. I was going to say another thing as well. What did I want to say? Yeah, ensuring that you have contexts of your claims, that there is enough context there to substantiate those claims. It might be evidence as well, publishing evidence. If you have a certificate that's looking at your carbon emissions, making sure that that is like accompanying that that content you're putting out there. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Just seeing there's a second question from Caroline here. We're hoping to start our Planet Mark journey. How do we go about this? Certainly, I don't know whether you've had any initial conversations with any of the team, Caroline, but we'll be delighted. We'll make sure one of the team reaches out to you to set up a call and discuss this. In simple terms, it'd be about understanding where you are on your own journey, and then looking at setting some boundaries for that initial measurement, or seeing whether you're needing to go down the full net zero transition plan. But we'll make sure that we reach out. One of the team will reach out to you, set up a call and discuss where you are on that journey and where we can start supporting you with. I'm just seeing, sorry, Lee, your question. Interested more in third-party verification. Where do you turn for this? Is there a qualification or standard to identify a company that can offer these services? I'll try and answer this at a high level. I'm very happy to sort of take it offline and have further conversations, Lee. Certainly in terms of third-party verification, assuming we're talking about the data side of things here, that, that, for example, that has been a blatant plug. That's what we do at Planet Mark. So for our 800 plus members, we are helping them measure their footprint, and we are verifying and validating that data, which has to be evidence-led. So, for example, a Planet Mark certification, we have external governance as well, marking our own homework and our own methodology. But that verification, that Planet Mark certification, if you like, that holds weight in that it shows whether this is, just something to have on your wall, or whether it's part of tenders, or in fact whether it's perhaps supporting your B Corp application, because we go hand in hand with those kind of organizations as well, because having a third party validated carbon footprint increases your score, increases your credibility. But hopefully that answers your question, but very happy to sort of go into more detail offline around that as well. Question from Justin. Leadership buy-in is key to this, absolutely. Do you still find leadership teams that don't support environmental initiatives, and why? Short answer, yes. Can't name many of them on this webinar for obvious reasons, but there are definite frustrations when speaking to certain organizations. You may have the most engaged, fantastic sustainability team, but quite often one or two members of an SLT who simply don't believe in net zero, don't believe in climate change. We do still find that they exist, partly because it can be a values thing. They're just, it's profit over purpose, or simply denial around climate change and sort of personal beliefs around that. Where we come across that, my answer is always, some of the things we've touched on today, to say, but this sustainability journey, this efficiency journey is still good for your business. So even if you don't believe in any of the above, by genuinely going on a true sustainability journey, communicating it properly, embedding it within the organization, how can your organization not improve and in itself have greater longevity? Hopefully that answers that to some extent, but again, happy to have separate conversations offline. Yeah. As an employee, there is a lot of information to take in throughout the sustainability journey. What are the best methods to progress and understand our knowledge in sustainability? Lucy, have you got any initial thoughts around that one?
Apologies if you can hear building work in the background, everybody. A lot of information to take in. Yes, there definitely is. What are the best methods to progress? I would say reading really reliable websites that sort of cover corporate sustainability, like Edie, for example, is a really helpful way to just keep your finger on the pulse of sustainability topics and to just expose yourself to that kind of jargon in inverted commas. It's about familiarity with, just like the difference between net zero and carbon neutrality. They sound very similar. And it's about sort of using those really reliable sources to sort of upskill yourself. And I think as well in sustainability, one of the key things is to ask questions. If you have like a sustainability manager in your company, to ask them questions about the company's journey. And if you are the sustainability manager, then it's about sort of seeking that support elsewhere to help you bring in the right protocols and practices into your company. I hope that helps a little bit.
Mindful of time, but we've got a question here from Karen. With all these certifications, accreditations around, where does B Corp fit in? As I only recently heard about this one. As a very high level, quick answer, certainly B Corp transcends more than just the carbon side of things. I personally think it's a very good accreditation. A number of our members have both Planet Mark certification and work on their net zero journey with us, and also have B Corp side of things, which is fantastic. As I said, there's a little bit of overlap, but certainly Planet Mark goes into far more detail around the emissions and the sustainability side of things, but in turn helps increase your B Corp scoring, which is a positive thing. There's lots online about B Corp. It's very much a bit of a movement, and yeah, we think it's a great thing as well. And the synergies that can exist with members who are both Planet Mark and B Corp is very strong. Lee, great. I'll look out for your LinkedIn connection. Actually been having lots of conversations about that around CDP. I think one of my colleagues actually has a call with them today. In terms of source of verification, it's an active discussion, shall we say, and one heading down a very committed path from our perspective. So I'll happily pick that up offline. Emma, what scopes of emissions would you say most businesses focus on when reading through bids? What do they seem to prioritize? I'm not sure on that one. I think it depends on the services being requested, to be fair, and what you as an organization, where your emissions sit. So it really does depend. Obviously, if you're supplying products and what have you, then your scope 3 emissions or your scope 1 and 2, which are going to feed into their scope 3 emissions, are going to be significant. From what I've seen, it really does depend on the nuance of that dynamic on that individual bid. I'm sorry, I know that's not a very specific answer, but probably as good as I can give at this stage. And then perhaps we've got one final one from Emily. Any advice on how to address critiques, especially online? We're a good way through our journey towards net zero, but we still, of course, get criticism from time to time. We find that most of our customers don't have a huge understanding of what net zero carbon neutral means, and we know that trying to correct people, especially on the internet, never works. Equally, ignoring it feels like we're not being transparent. Any tips?
Yeah, I'd say, Emily, here, this is a good example where evidence and that kind of proof is your sort of friend here, to sort of show that you've taken those steps, your organization has taken those steps to progress on that journey to net zero. I would say that it is an ongoing conversation, isn't it, about sort of educating stakeholders, customers, new audiences about sustainability. And even though it feels like it never works, I think it's about continuing to be confident that Yes, that you are committed to this net zero journey, and it might just mean that along the way, sort of people who are criticizing this need to be sort of educated so that they understand that you are taking those credible steps. Not sure if that's very helpful, but yeah, I'd say sort of evidence is useful here.
I think just to add to that one as well, Emily, is perhaps having, whether it's on the website or a document, almost an FAQs around your sustainability journey as an organization, exactly what you're doing, and making it very clear that you guys understand the difference between net zero and carbon neutral, perhaps spelling that out, but being able to refer people to that one point of reference rather than, as you say, correctly online never ends well. And there's plenty of trolls there, and you don't want to get engaged in just a negative spiral of dialogue. So perhaps having that where you have a reference point where you can always point people to, which, as Lisa says, is evidence-based, very detailed, very definite, and spells out in no uncertain terms your understandings and your trajectory.
Absolutely. It could be a link through to your website that's got a really transparent, detailed sustainability page, which really encompasses your whole journey. And it's that you're directing them to there. And there are those definitions sitting on there. Yeah, absolutely. And then I think we might just need to take just one more, and then I think we might have to stop for today. But given the importance of leadership support in driving sustainability initiatives, how can organizations effectively engage leadership teams that are hesitant or indifferent to environmental efforts?
I think the way that we tackle that at Planet Mark, and this is just the way we approach it, is we are often working with larger organizations who, exactly as you say, Deborah, have perhaps a mixed leadership team in terms of where they are on net zero and carbon, climate reduction in general. We will often, within our net zero transition plan work for an organization, we will have a net zero masterclass. And that masterclass is one we generally have at the start of that journey. And we insist upon that having SLT on that. It's critical because this has to trickle down to the organization. And the amount of times where that masterclass has been a tangible tipping point in terms of the organization's approach to everything, understanding what net zero actually is, why they need to do it, the importance, and the potential business upside from doing it, can't be understated. So from our perspective, having those masterclasses where you are having those, high level but very detailed and nuanced conversations about also why, for your particular organization, you should be looking at it. That tends to be how we approach it, which I appreciate. That's a third party support in doing it, but that's certainly how we support our members and stakeholders with getting that leadership buy-in. So I don't know if Lucy, if you've got anything to add to that or any other thoughts.
No, I think that covers it off really well, because it's absolutely key that they're on board. Brilliant. Well, I hope we've answered your questions. Just for those who are still on the call, thank you for sticking with us, even though we've run over time a little bit. Just wanted to highlight some useful links that might be helpful to take a look at after the presentation, and just that to take a look at our upcoming events. On Wednesday, the 18th of September, we have a UK Net Zero Business Census Report Key Findings webinar. So really delving into that report and looking at the sort of the landscape of net zero across the UK from a corporate perspective.